So let's talk about cats. This is a bit of a topic of interest for lots of people. Um, so New Zealanders love cats. We have the highest rate of cat ownership in the world, and 41% of our households have cats. They have 1.8 cats per household. So there's quite a lot of cats out there. We have a culture of letting our cats roam, and we always have. I grew up with roaming cats because in New Zealand, cats are apex predators. There's no coyotes out there. So most places in the world, cats are kept safe and happy at home because the threats that are outside of their home are significant, and owners don't want to give that put their cats under that risk. In New Zealand, that's slightly different. Um, the challenge around cats is we actually don't really know how many cats there are. We know the domestic number, so we know there's 1.2 million domestic cats. We've got a very broad range, you'll see, of 2 to 14 million feral cats, which tells me we have no idea. We don't know the density of cats across the country, but anecdotally, the cat numbers, the feral cat numbers out there are increasing. Um, so, so I probably don't need to tell you this, but cats are highly skilled hunters. They kill regardless of hunger, and they kill for fun, really. And na our native species here evolved without predators, and so they're not equipped for dealing with the highly skilled hunting skills of a cat. Um, the impacts are actually much broader than just the impacts on our native wildlife. Obviously, that's well documented in terms of the impacts on lizards, our bats, our bird species. Our species just aren't equipped to deal with the highly skilled hunting of a cat. But cats are also the primary host for toxoplasmosis, which is a protozoa, and that breeds only within the cat. Um, but it has impacts on other people. I was talking to someone yesterday who told me how bad it was when they had toxo. So it gets into humans. Maui dolphins, it's been shown that it's a major cause of death for Maui dolphins. Kaka, kiwi, kiriru, and more. Like, I think we don't really know the full impacts of toxo, but we're now starting to look at it more and more. The other thing that anyone that's a farmer will know, or a sheep farmer will know, is it has a significant impact on sheep production and causes early abortion of lambs. So farmers immunize against toxo across the country. Cats are also quite amazing because they're kind of everywhere. They can be found from the sea and wandering along the beach right up to the alpine zone. And in fact, some research recently showed a cat that regularly crossed the Southern Alps. They called this cat the Alpine Specialist because it would spend weeks at a time just up in the Alps and then down to the other side and back up. It was just had a a pattern of regular hunting up at that height. Um, and the densities vary across the country. I think we all have this impression that our introduced predators control the prey, but it's actually the other way around. So rabbit numbers control the cat numbers. If there's an abundance of rabbits around, there will be an abundance of ferrets and cats. And so if we can control some of their food sources, we do actually have an impact on their population. So as I said, we've got a culture of letting our own cats roam, and some of these cats roam a huge distance. They'll roam, the average is 1.2 in urban situations, but we have heard of urban cats being up to 7K, and their owners are flabbergasted that they have gone that far. And yeah, I think as cat owners, we've got no idea really where our cats go. Roaming's bad for cats because they get into fights and they get run over and they get into danger. But it's also really bad for our wildlife. So what we're advocating for is a change in it and what is a responsible cat owner in New Zealand, and that means keeping your cat at home, desexing and microchipping it. Cats also only bring home less than 25% of what they kill. So most owners think, oh, my cat never kills, doesn't catch anything or only catches rats. The truth is we've got no idea what they're catching because the impacts are much broader. But cats are hugely important to as companion animals. And so if we want to change behavior, we need to change hearts and minds. And it's not about, for lots of cat owners, it's not about the birds and the wildlife. It's really around the safety and protection of their cat. So if we're thinking about how we change people's behavior and communicate, it's really around keeping cats safe and happy at home, and think about who the messenger is, who the person is telling them. So other cat owners are really important in this conversation, as are vets. And what we're trying to do is really get a change in a National Cat Act, which I'll talk about in a second. But if we win over hearts and minds, it also leads to political support. So perceptions are changing in this space. We've been talking about cats for 10 years, so it's quite a long time. But what you can see, this is the most recent research around cats. So people are increasingly aware that feral cats are having a huge impact on our native species. It's a bit slower in the domestic cat space, but I think we're seeing that happen. And in Wellington, we have had multiple examples of people's cats bringing home saddleback through their cat door, or keriru, which I always think is really impressive. A cat can get a keriru. So as we see these events happen, we see owners really confronted by it, and a change in the conversation around how we own our cats. Support for desexing and microchipping is really strong. This is actually old data because the new data is basically the same. So there's really strong support for microchipping and desexing. There's an increasing support around people keeping cats on their own property, and limiting the number of cats they own is actually quite commonplace around the country in different bylaws. I've talked about that a little bit. Oh, the only thing about responsible cat ownership is what's really cool, in this massive change that's happened in the last 10 years is around the support from Vets Association, SPCA, companion animals, the change in the conversation of rather us thinking that cats have a right to roam to, oh, it's not good for the cats and it's not good for our wildlife. And so you're seeing all these organizations all singing from the same page, which helps us when we talk about a cat act. But it's really important to bring the community on the journey, and that's why it's going to take time, because we need to shift people's perceptions. So the challenge with cat legislation is it's really complex and grey. Basically, cats fall through the cracks of every existing piece of legislation. And I think where they end up being caught is really in they become private property. So if you do any damage to someone's pet cat, it's considered damage to someone's private property. And that's challenging. And it's challenging for councils, because if you have people with 30 cats living in the house next door to you, there's often very little that councils can do. So we're seeing this change from councils and bylaws in terms of setting expectations around microchipping and desexing. And we're seeing regional pest management plans have more measures around cats in them too. So site-specific, specific sites where you can't have wandering cats. But we need a National Cat Act because it's so patchwork across the country. It's inconsistent, and also we need to take it out of the hands of local politicians, because they don't actually want to do it. Your local councillors don't want to have to consult on that. It's really inefficient when we've got all these councils around the country, all consulting and doing the same research around what bylaws they can change. What we're asking for is desexing and microchipping. Keeping cats at home is a little bit more difficult, and we expect that to be in the legislation, but done at a community level. And so communities can consult around what is appropriate in their community and their space around limiting the movement of cats. So we're asking really for something similar to the Dog Act, which was actually only introduced in 1996. So most of us in this room will remember, but before that, dogs often were roaming streets. They weren't contained on people's property. I remember being terrified walking down my street because a dog would run out of people's driveways. So yeah, so we can change, and it actually happens really quickly. The good news is there's quite strong political support. Last year in about August, I think in about August, the Environment Select Committee did a report that supported a National Cat Act. And we're seeing a number of councils around the country change and add these bylaws, as well as in regional pest management plans. And we've been working with a number of kind of politicians at a more central level around how would we get a National Cat Act through. The thing that is really central to this is it is the best thing for our owned cats, as well as being the best thing for our wildlife. There's some grey areas, I guess, around the stray cats, so the cats that are fed in colonies in the Pack and Save car park. How do we deal with those without losing social license or public support? So we need to think how we manage those carefully. And then there's another practice that some of you may be aware of, which is called trap, neuter, return, or trap, neuter, release. And that's when you take it, capture a cat, stray or feral, really, neuter it and return it to where you found it. And we don't really support the use of that as a tool of control. The research shows that doesn't really work in terms of controlling numbers. And in the meantime, you've got those cats out there still impacting our native species. So it's a bit of a it's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, just because there's a bit of action, but the support in this space has really grown and changed. We know that the support for controlling feral cats is there, and later this year there's meant to be a consultation around the strategy for Predator Free 2050, and they're going to relook whether they add feral cats into that or not. So they may add feral cats into that, which makes sense in these places where we're controlling everything else, yet they are not controlling feral cats. But it is a long road, and it's slow going, but we are seeing this shift, and we're seeing more and more cat owners either grandfather their cats, which means not replace their existing cats, or when they get a new kitten, to keep them at home. So we are seeing a change, especially when people have got in places like Wellington, where there's this kind of strong return of biodiversity into our backyards, and people don't want their cats to be impacting that biodiversity. So we can change, and it can happen. I think that might be my last slide. So yeah, happy to take any questions on cats or predator free.
Great. Let's go to questions again. Which demographic should we go for? The longest beard? I'm not sure. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Jesse. We're involved with trapping all sorts of predators up in our Kiwi block, and I'm very concerned that we don't get too focused on one species, that we take a broad, holistic view, because if we kill the rats, are the cats going to go after something else like our precious kiwi or something like that, or are the mice going to suddenly develop a big population? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit what I was referring to earlier around this complexity in the ecosystem. And so you're right, you remove one thing and something else responds. And we see that when you remove all the ship rats, the Norway rats climb higher up the trees than they previously did. When you remove all the stoats, we see this explosion in weasels. So that I think your approach is right, and having a multi-species approach is the right way to go forward, because otherwise you may have these unintended consequences.
Thank you. And second question, who did we have? We had a bunch of out there. Tom, we're going to give you a go. We're going to give you the youngest question. Geez, I'd just like to encourage everyone who lives rurally to use trail cams, and like referring back to what you mentioned earlier, we have a rural property of a small bush block, And if we had not had a trail cam in our driveway, we would totally be unaware of the cat population because you don't see them during the daytime. And in the past 2 and a bit years, I've caged 21 cats. And none of these belong to neighbours. And you're right, they do have a big roaming area. So is there any thought, so my question is there any thought in terms of expanding public campaign about informing the wider public about the impact that feral cats have, because there's still a lot of there still needs to be a lot more information put out there to persuade people that cats are the menace they are.
Yeah. Yeah, a few things in there. So firstly, I don't think I was clear in my Prezo, actually. The reason that microchipping cats is so important is so that we can manage cats in kind of peri-urban areas or on that boundary between owned cats, where owned cats live and not. So in Wellington, for example, there's a number of reserves and all the cats walking through there, we think, are owned, but we actually don't know if they're owned or not because it's not, well, it's just come in Wellington actually that it's compulsory to microchip your cat. But so that is the reason for the microchipping, is that identification. But if you're lucky enough to live far enough from town and know your neighbour's cats, then you can track and kill cats quite easily without that identification method. You're right that the cats, you wouldn't know they're there unless you've got a camera. They're so sneaky and sly that, well, they're just super cautious. So you're not going to see them in the day walking along the road or whatever. It's very rare to see a feral cat, except on Rakiura, I think, where you see quite a few because the population's so high. So cameras are amazing tools. And then we've been trying on this campaign around responsible cat ownership and trying that. But I think you're right. There's probably more of a story for us to tell around the impact that feral cats are having. And I walked the Milford a couple of years ago and there was feral cats within the Milford. They had all these cameras up trying to catch it. And that's shocking, you're so far away, so remote. And I think most New Zealanders have got no idea that those feral cats are walking up over the mountains and in places they're not owned, they've never been owned, and they're doing a huge amount of impact. So yeah, so I agree. I'm hoping actually that as you were talking that this 2050 strategy review will give us an opportunity to talk about the impact about feral cats to a broader audience, because I think now, at least within the conservation space, there's quite a good understanding, but I'm conscious that we're often talking to similar people. I call it the green bubble, we're communicating within this green bubble. So how do we talk wider than that? And how do we get outside the kind of that audience to a more mainstream audience and normalize, the responsible cat ownership that we want?
Can I just make a comment, Jessie? Toxoplasmosis is a very real thing in affecting humans. I know 2 people quite close to me. One who's died from effects of it. The other one almost lost the sight in one of her eyes. That's quite recent.
But
so it's real.
It is real. I think it's just often really not diagnosed. So people think it's glandular fever or chronic fatigue or something. But yeah, that's really interesting. And it is real and it is out there.
Thank you, Jessie. Appreciate your talk. It's always something that we as Predator people, we love talking about cats, and I bet there's going to be some big conversations over Smoko, which is coming up soon. Look, we stalked you on Facebook just to check that you were okay. And apparently you're a foodie, so we have some yummy treats on the way to you at the moment.
Oh, thank you.
Mail. And if the Whitakers is missing, that's Janie's fault, not mine. Just saying, yeah. So thank you very much, and well, sayonara, and look forward to hearing you talk again. Thank you.
So much for having me. Yeah.